The Pew Research Center says only a third of Americans say that being truly American means following the Christian faith. The study showed that 32% of Americans say being Christian is very important to national identity. More Republicans were reported to say Christianity is essential to being truly American, while 29% of Democrats agreed.
A leaked draft of the executive order shows the Trump administration might move to expand religious freedom.
What it more or less does is it undoes a lot of the bad things that took place during the Obama years that burdened religious liberty.
Ryan Anderson with the Heritage Foundation says this order would protect religious rights, especially in the areas of conflict on LGBT and abortion issues. It would also prevent some private companies from having to offer contraceptive coverage as part of their health plans.
It says that all Americans need to have the option of purchasing a pro-life health care plan. They can't be limited to only health care plans that pay for or subsidize abortion.
The draft reads in part, persons and organizations do not forfeit their religious freedom when providing social services, education, or health care, earning a living, seeking a job, or employing others. The order would also pave the way for tax-exempt groups to voice opinions on moral or political issues from a religious perspective without losing their tax-exempt status.
No American citizen should be forced to choose between holding to their own deeply held religious beliefs and serving our American government. That shouldn't happen.
To top that, the Department of Justice would form a working group which would look into potential religious liberty violations. Opponents worry this order could permit businesses to refuse service to gay customers or even let employers fire workers because of their sexual orientation or gender identity.
Americans seem to either love or hate President Donald Trump's executive action that keeps people from 7 Muslim-majority nations known to harbor terrorists from visiting the U.S. And the controversy continues.
Judges addressed whether or not the block on the president's executive order should be lifted. A hearing on the legality of the executive order is still to come, and the Trump administration feels confident the law is on their side.
It says, quote, whenever the president finds that the entry of any aliens or of any class of aliens into the United States would be detrimental to the interests of the United States, he may by proclamation, and for such period as he shall deem necessary, suspend the entry of all aliens or any class of aliens as immigrants or non-immigrants, or impose on the entry of aliens any restrictions which he may deem appropriate.
Despite their confidence, Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly told a House committee that in hindsight, he should have delayed implementing the order to brief Congress on the details. Ranking member Democrat Benny Thompson asked Kelly if any terrorists had made their way into the country during the time the court halted the ban.
You don't have any proof at this point?
Not until the boom.
Not until what?
Not until they act and blow something up or go into a mall and kill people. So we won't know until then.
Donald Trump has got to go! Hey, hey! Oh, oh.
Pockets of protest continue, this one in Houston.
We want to let the world know that this country welcomes Muslims. We're not going to stand for a ban.
President Trump told a group of visiting sheriffs a ban on immigrants from certain countries is just common sense.
If you remember, ISIS said we are going to infiltrate the United States and other countries through the migration. And then we're not allowed to be tough on the people coming in?
If the executive order ends up at the Supreme Court, it's not a guarantee the court would deadlock. Justice Anthony Kennedy, the swing vote, could uphold the president's order. Depending on the timing, Judge Neil Gorsuch could also find himself weighing in on any decision.
It's in your television shows.
Let's start with cracker. While linguistic history is always murky, recent research has shown that in the 16 and 1700s, British aristocrats used cracker as a shortened version of cracked brains, or idle-headed, to disparage lower-class people as dumb and lazy.
It's on the news.
What do you say to the people who dragged a poor white guy out of a car and beat him?
Oh my goodness, poor white people, please, oh my, stop. Stop it, Carl.
And it's glorified in Hollywood.
Here comes yet another token black presenter.
It is the cognitive dissonance feeding weapon of reverse racism. That is, rather than agreeing on and fighting for equality across the board, reverse racism is described as acts of discrimination and prejudice perpetrated by racial minorities or historically oppressed ethnical groups against individuals belonging to the racial majority or historically dominant ethnical groups. In other words, it is reverse discrimination based on racial criteria at the heart of division in the United States of America.
Mediocre Negroes being dragged in front of TV as a photo op for Donald Trump's exploitative campaign against black people, and you are a prime example of that, sir.
How are you going to? So now you want a name call, Mark?
Simone, you better jump in if you want to talk.
Now you want a name call.
Then, you know, if you don't want to support the alt-right, don't choose as a White House counselor a man who uses the word, whose wife says that he did not want his daughters to go to a school with too many Jews. And don't choose as an attorney general a man who calls the NAACP an un-American organization, and who we learned in The Guardian today went so far as to prosecute
Charles,
two of the
just
people.
hang on a second. I appreciate you going through all of this, but please don't use the N-word on my show.
I'm sorry. Well, I never use the N-word except when I'm quoting someone who's been appointed by the president to serve in the Oval Office, since this is such a disgusting moment in our history.
And its use by the liberal hard left is utilized as a static bulwark against the rational progress needed to move a democratic melting pot culture forward. Mikhail Thalen of InfoWars reports the terms microaggression and safe space were added this week to the Merriam-Webster dictionary. The terms associated with modern progressives have caused a backlash by both conservatives, classical liberals, and some in academia. In an article entitled The Coddling of the American Mind, writers for The Atlantic argue that the phenomenon is disastrous for education and mental health. John Rappaport echoes that sentiment when he writes, "Here is a staggering statistic from the National Alliance on Mental Illness. More than 25% of college students have been diagnosed or treated by a professional for a mental health condition within the past year." You want to know where all this victim-oriented "I'm triggered and I need a safe space" comes from? You just found it. The millennial generation, or Generation Y, has embraced a revolution of reverse racism that will likely evolve into a narcissistic, dysfunctional, brainwashed cancer on the progress required by the emerging Generation Z. Generation Z was primarily raised by Generation X, and Generation X lived through the transformation of the Jim Crow era into the counterculture and anti-establishment, anti-racist views of the 1970s. Face it, racism-spewing left, your days are numbered. As the millennial generation splinters off into adulthood and reason takes a minimal hold, a far more individualistic and technologically savvy generation will be criticizing your leftist tunnel vision in no time.